Hey creeps, it's Horror Free For All. Continuing my passion project I affectionately call Hall of Creeps, a series where I look at full-length feature films that feel like they would fit into my most beloved horror franchise of all time, Creepshow. And for today's video, I picked a very controversial film that has in recent years become sort of a meme in the horror community. This film was made in 2015 as a quote-unquote remake of an early 1980s film called Blood Beach. It was directed by Isaac Gebeth and written by Alex Greenfield and Ben Powell. And the film in question is called The Sand. Now, The Sand, you might recognize if you possibly look at the trailer of it or maybe watch a few minutes worth of footage from the film. When it came out in the mid-2010s, it didn't really make a splash in the bucket since it was straight to DVD and streaming, and somehow it gained popularity a few years back around COVID, which put this movie on my radar, and I watched it around that time. And I can remember the first time watching this movie, I absolutely fucking hated it. These days, it reminds me of why I like Creepshow in some facets of it. And I don't find it completely intolerable to watch, since it's an under 90-minute film and it has a brisk pace to it. But holy fuck, does this film have a lot of problems. But we'll get to that near the end of this video, because in my opinion, I think The Sand doesn't necessarily deserve a reevaluation, but maybe once I'm done with this video, you can kind of see my perspective on it. You see, The Sand, I don't think is by any stretch an intentional masterpiece by any regards. If anything, it's an accidental commentary about how friendships are affected by peers and love interests and little petty things that build up under the surface and create tension to the point where you kind of have to face that tension head on. And also, you know, if we want to call a spade, this is a very cheesy creature feature B movie. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the second segment of 1987's Creepshow 2 called The Raft, with an eerily similar premise about teens going out on an adventure to party and hang out, but a creature gets in the way of all the fun. And this is a very stretched out version of The Raft, if you want to say that. Now, I can totally see people wanting to roast and pick this movie apart, and I get that, but hear me out. And let's start off with an idea of what this story is about. So the movie kicks off with a group of teenagers, maybe young college students. It never really explains how old they are, but they're around that age. They're hanging out with a video camera at night on a beach during spring break. And at this party, the young ones are getting wild. And somehow, they, in a drunken stupor, find a giant egg that they bring to the area that they're partying at, and they continue drinking and continue having a night of fun until it stops becoming fun because they pass out. And the next morning, our main heroine, Kaylee, of the story, wakes up next to a guy that she didn't necessarily want to wake up next to. And this guy is actually played by Mitchell Musso, who you might recognize from Disney Channel's Hannah Montana show. Once she realizes that she's up in this lifeguard stoop with this guy, she wants to know where her boyfriend is. And she looks down from the stoop and sees a parked car right next door to it. And he is sleeping with her best friend, Shonda. And Shonda was thought by Kaylee to be trying to sleep with her boyfriend the night before, and that angered her to the point where she started drinking and hanging out with Mitchell Musso's character. Now, once Kaylee realizes where they're at and how early it is in the morning, and she's kind of looking around, she notices that a nearby animal got sucked underneath the sand, which causes her to freak out and make a commotion. This, of course, wakens everybody else around her, like this guy played by Mitchell Musso, her boyfriend in the car with her friend Shonda, this other blonde girl and her boyfriend, and a random big fat guy stuck in a barrel nearby as well, who has a dick drawn on his face. They really don't know what else to think because, they're awoken in this stupor. But there's a girl who had also woken up that was on a picnic table out in the middle of the sand nearby everyone else, and she is completely topless. And while she bears all, she is warned by Kaylee, don't go on the sand because something is terribly wrong. Something is off. And she, of course, doesn't listen because she doesn't think to believe anything. And we see her possibly get affected by this sand, which causes one of the gentlemen in the car to want to get out and save her. And when he tries to get out, we see him succumb to the sand as well. Now, once these two are taken care of in the story, the remaining survivors, let's just say, have to navigate the rest of the movie trying to figure out ways around this proverbial sandbox that they found themselves in. While it sounds like nothing eventful happens, we do see certain characters try to make their mark in the story. As we see Kaylee's boyfriend and supposedly Shonda's lover get tired of waiting around and tries to make his way to the picnic table to find his way out of this area that the monster is thought to be in. And this is because Kaylee, being the genius that she is, experimented around with some animal meat that was lurking around in her lifeguard tower and throws it to see if maybe some of this meat can stay on top of the sand without getting sucked under. And after experimenting around, they realize that there is an area, but it's quite a bit of ways away. And they're going to have to narrowly try to navigate this sand, not only to get to a safe place, but they also have to take into account that everybody's in different areas. Like Kaylee and Mitchell Musso's character is in a lifeguard tower. There's 3 of these young adults inside of this car. And then, of course, you have the big guy, I think his name is Gilbert, stuck in this trash can. So, as the day goes along, we see what happens to Kaylee's boyfriend, and he possibly gets taken out of the equation. Not necessarily killed, but something grotesque happens to his body as a result of coming really close to whatever creature is in this sand. And this, of course, makes the girl start to panic in the car, and they realize that there might be some help in the trunk, and there's a whole scene involving that. And then, of course, the guy that Kaylee's with up in the lifeguard tower comes up with an idea. Shortly after, there's a character that comes into the story, played by Jamie Kennedy, who might be a cop, introduces an idea to these young adults that whatever he has might be a solution how to navigate the sand, let's just say. And then, of course, we see some more bloodshed, CGI and all of its glory, of quite a few characters biting the dust, all the way down until there's 3 characters left. As you can assume, Kaylee is one of them, and I'll go ahead and say that Shonda, and perhaps another character that we haven't really thought about in the story, are the last ones remaining. And it's nearing dark, and we finally see this true form of this creature. And over time in the film, we've already connected the dots as well, that the egg from the beginning of the story perhaps hatched, and that may be what's hiding under the surface of the sand. And we see in the very end what characters make it out of the equation, and possibly what happens to the creature under the sand and its current whereabouts. I'm going to say this up front. Despite this film being less than 90 minutes, this is an absolute cringe fest. Whether we're talking from the acting performances to the terrible, and I mean fucking terrible CGI, blood, creature effects, you name it. It's a hard thing to stomach. And The first time you watch this movie, I think it's the most jarring of the experience. Because I can remember the first time watching this, and I thought it was one of the worst fucking films I had ever seen at that point in my life. But you know, as I've seen it multiple times now, yes, I am that crazy, I think that this film has grown on me. And I can kind of look past the terrible CGI and the terrible overacting and just abysmal acting performances, and I can kind of vibe with the idea and the tension that's building in the story. And I'll be the first to admit, as somebody who's seen this movie multiple times now, this film does have gripping tension at points. And it's kind of fun thinking outside of the box with these characters who have to come up with these elaborate contraptions to navigate this sand creature and avoid touching it, which is pretty much as ultimate of a stake as you can have in a film. If you touch the sand with your skin, you're pretty much good as dead. And as we learn in the movie with certain characters, if you bleed and it can sense your blood, it can completely take over your clothing, whatever you're housed in. It doesn't fucking care. And then at nighttime, it shows its true form. And it's a monolithic sea alien creature with unknown origin, which makes it intriguing and also kind of, I wouldn't say scary, but tense. And that's, I think, this film's greatest strength to it. There's a never-ending possibility that you can kind of work around given the terrain, given what's available in the surrounding area, while there's stuff that I kind of wish was utilized more, involving the car, or maybe some aspects of the lifeguard tower. We do get some fun utilizations here of a cop car belonging to Jamie Kennedy's character and how that plays a role in the climax. We also get, I guess, a cool sequence of events that come across after a piece of the lifeguard tower falls down and how that translates to the folks in the car. But I digress. We can kind of lay into this movie if we really wanted to at the same time here now. I'm not trying to boast this movie up for being better than what it is. And I'm just gonna be upfront. It is chore-like to sit through this movie. Not because of those ailments I mentioned before. It's because the plot drags so much ass, and there's so many minutes of this movie of just panic manic dialogue and not really moving these characters forward or making us identify with the characters in a deep, meaningful way. And if the writing of the characters tend to take you out of film, I could see this movie doing that for you. Going back to the budget and the effects of this movie, if you have come here for B-movie carnage, you might as well go watch a crappy low-budget sci-fi movie than watch this in terms of its gore. Yes, if you don't know, there is a mix of practical and CGI in this movie. But anything that's practical that's in this film, minus maybe the stuff on a certain character's stomach that comes into contact with a creature in the film, is enhanced by CGI. And holy shit, some of these death sequences are absolutely awful. Whether we're talking about a certain character that gets wrapped up in tentacles, a certain character that's eaten from the outside inward and turns into a gelatinous blood puddle, whether we're talking about what happens to Jamie Kennedy's character in specifics, while it's kind of cool in concept, it looks absolutely fucking terrible. And some people love to beat this over the head too, but I guess I'll go ahead and throw how shitty this is at the same time. For majority of the film, we see these little spaghetti hair strands poking out of the sand coming after the people. And the movie can't make its fucking mind up of how this shit works. Some characters, when it touches them, they start having bodily mutilations and flesh ripping off, which can be kind of cool despite the CGI terrible enhancement. And then sometimes it just looks basic and fucking weird. And then there's a cutaway to avoid showing their death I don't know why. Maybe it was the budget, or maybe they just ran out of money at a certain fucking point of the movie, or maybe they just didn't fucking care in the editing process. I couldn't tell you. But it's hilariously inconsistent. And all said and done, the story in the end result is something that you have seen done before in better films. Like the whole coming together story with Kaylee and Shonda specifically is, I guess, the heartbeat of the story. And by the end of it, you don't really feel like they are actual friends, but we have some sort of history laid out in the plot, even though it's very vague and surface level, that we can work with and kind of buy that this whole ordeal has brought them, I guess, closer, which I guess is something for this movie. Which leads me to this point. Why did this movie need to get made? Well, I'm not really curious as to the motives of the creators, because I think they had some semblance of an idea, but I don't think they had the experience of making a great film out of it. Which sucks, because I can tell by this movie alone that the three involved, Isaac Gaboff, Alex Greenfield, and Ben Powell, had a love for schlocky horror comics, because this story harkens back to my point I made earlier that it feels like The Raft from Creepshow 2. Or at least invokes the same manicness that segment provided. And perhaps, if this film was truncated down to 20 to 30 minutes, and we just got a segment length out of it, I think this would have hit a whole lot better. Especially if the acting was turned up, the budget and the effects were turned up, and maybe some more sound ideas with the characters were done better. This would have been a home run Creepshow segment, albeit kind of riffing on an already popular one. But I digress, because The Sand, I think, serves best as a schlocky horror comic story than a film. Going back to what I said earlier, I do think that there is some unintentional subtext of the story. You have Kaylee and Shonda's friendship and coming together that perhaps ties symmetrically to all the events coinciding in the story. You see, these random strangers are witnesses to their drama, and this wedge between them is figurative space from the lifeguard tower to the car, and the catalyst of all of this is this guy who's with Chanda while Kaylee still loves her guy, and Chanda never actually did anything with her boyfriend, supposedly, as we learn in the movie, yet she has to kind of watch Chanda be around her boyfriend with all this distance in between them. And perhaps Kaylee, being the main character, wants to be friends with Chanda, but this whole event has kind of brought her into focus that she not only needs to protect her boyfriend above everybody else, but also her friendship with Chanda as the story goes along. Because she realizes as these people are dying that Chanda doesn't necessarily need to be somebody to hate in the situation. Because does Chanda deserve what's happening to everybody else around them? And you can look at the beach and the underlying monster in the sand being the under the surface tension between the two in the film, and how it's killing everybody else around them. If you wanted to be artistic and metaphorical with it, perhaps the monster in the sand is killing people and eating people around them, because perhaps it's a metaphor for hatred or betrayal, and everybody else has to deal with it and they get wrapped up in it. Yes, you can kind of put that onto this film if you wanted to, but I don't think any of that is intentional. It's 100% interpretive. And I think that does help salvage this movie. I just wish the fucking writing was better at sending that home. All said and done, I think The Sand is a pretty bad movie, but it's not hateable. I can totally see if you hate this movie, but I don't think it's a complete wash. And I also think that if this was supposed to be a Blood Beach remake, I have never seen Blood Beach. It was an early 80s film that was actually ripping on Jaws of all things, and it was using a hole in the beach that has a monster inside killing people to be the source of hysteria for whatever beach town that the story is set in. If this is supposed to be a remake of that, I don't really think it quite fits into that idea, because going off what I heard about the movie, I don't think Blood Beach and The Sand are quite equal here. But I think people tend to overgeneralize similar concepts and possibly threw that theory out there and it stuck on social media. I couldn't tell you. But since I haven't seen Blood Beach, I can't tell you if this movie's any better. But conceptually, I think I like this over that film. So with that being said, if I had to rate this movie just based on quality, it would be fucking terrible, and I'd probably give it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. However, because I can kind of see some charm in it, with the cheese, with the stuff with the friends, and, I'm going to be honest, the tension, I think, does work, and it has a solid pace, even though it drags a lot of ass, because there's only so much you can do with the concept. I think I probably could be generous on this film and give it maybe like a 2 out of 5 stars, which is meh. Meh is very fair in my opinion, especially for a film like this. Yes, in my most coveted passion projects such as Hall of Creeps or some other ones I do on here, like Gems from the Crypt and Discovering Anthology and some other ones you might see pop up in the near future, they're not always going to be high recommendations. I'm literally just making these videos because they fit in with whatever franchise that I'm trying to tie it to. And while it sucks that this movie isn't as good as it could be, I think it does fit in the Creepshow vein. Maybe Creepshow 3 type quality, but conceptually, it feels like Creepshow. It feels like the comics that Creepshow took source material from or inspiration and made it iconic and made it into the franchise that it became. And for that, I low-key love it. That's all I have to say about this movie, The Sand. Let me know down in the comment section, what are your thoughts on this movie? Until next time, take care.